It began as a typical evening in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, a place where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. Streetlights flickered faintly over the tree-lined roads, casting shadows that stretched across the sidewalks and into the manicured lawns. In one apartment, on the second floor of a low-rise building, James Turner was preparing for what appeared to be a normal dinner party. James, 34, was a man known for his charisma and social charm. Neighbors described him as polite, engaging, always ready with a joke or a story, someone who seemed to have life under control. Friends knew him as the kind of person who could host an event seamlessly: dinner parties, game nights, even casual get-togethers, and make them feel intimate and lively. To outsiders, he was entirely unremarkable in the best way possible: dependable, friendly, and affable. Yet behind closed doors, James had cultivated a different world entirely, one of secrecy, obsession, and darkness. That evening, the apartment was filled with the kind of energy only a meticulously planned event could produce. The scent of roasted meat, fresh herbs, and baked goods wafted through the living room. Candles flickered softly on the dining table, reflecting off the polished glasses and cutlery. Every detail was considered, every element deliberate, as if James wanted the evening to be perfect not for his guests, but for the illusion of normalcy. His roommate, Mark Benson, 29, was the picture of trustworthiness and ease. Creative, thoughtful, and generally mild-mannered, Mark had lived with James for over a year. Their relationship had always seemed amicable, even friendly. Neighbors occasionally saw them leaving for errands together, laughing in the hallway, or sharing a quick coffee in the morning. But appearances, as often happens in cases like these, can be deceiving. Throughout the day leading up to the dinner, subtle tensions simmered beneath the surface. James had meticulously planned the menu, arranging each dish with precision, moving ingredients from the fridge to the countertop, measuring, stirring, seasoning. To any observer, he appeared like a man executing the perfect dinner party. But in reality, there was a method behind each action, a preparation for something far darker than anyone could imagine. Mark, meanwhile, was unaware of what lay ahead. He had been asked to give James some space that evening, a seemingly innocuous request to allow James time to finish the meal prep. Mark complied, heading to his room to finish some personal work, checking his phone, listening to music, and occasionally peeking into the kitchen where James moved with precision and calm. Guests began to arrive around 7:00 p.m. Among them were friends from work, old college acquaintances, and a few neighbors. They were welcomed warmly, handed drinks, and seated in the living room while the first courses were prepared. James moved among them with the practiced ease, ensuring everyone felt attended to, offering light conversation, jokes, and compliments. Everything seemed ordinary, everything seemed safe. The first course was served: a perfectly roasted chicken, a variety of vegetables, and a light salad. The guests complimented James on his culinary skills, noting the delicate seasoning, the crisp skin, the tender meat. Conversation flowed naturally, laughter punctuated the air, and the apartment seemed alive with social warmth. Yet all the while, Mark's absence was unnoticed, or perhaps deliberately minimized by James. No one questioned where Mark was. No one insisted he join the party. There was no indication, at least in that moment, that anything was wrong. Later, during dessert, James made a peculiar request. He insisted that one particular dish, a meatloaf he had prepared earlier, be shared among everyone at the table. Guests, accustomed to his meticulous hosting, assumed this was part of the meal plan. They complimented him, took portions, and continued their conversation. It was only later that the grim reality would begin to take shape. By the end of the night, guests said their goodbyes. They laughed, hugged, and promised to meet again soon. The apartment returned to its quiet state, shadows settling into the corners of the room, the faint hum of the refrigerator punctuating the silence. And then, the true horror began. James Turner was alone in the apartment, or so he appeared to be. The reality, as would soon be discovered by law enforcement, was far more sinister. Mark Benson had vanished. Neighbors noticed Mark's absence. The following morning, texts went unanswered, calls rang with no reply. Concern grew quickly among those who had known him well. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances began to worry something didn't feel right. Police were eventually called. Officers arrived at the apartment to find James calm, collected, and disturbingly prepared. He explained that Mark had left suddenly due to a family emergency. He guided the officers through the apartment with rehearsed ease, showing them the living spaces, the kitchen, the bedroom, everything staged to appear normal. But trained eyes quickly noticed anomalies. The kitchen, immaculate at first glance, revealed subtle signs of violence, smudges on countertops, the unnatural placement of utensils, faint stains that didn't match the meal James had described. These small inconsistencies whispered of something far worse than a sudden disappearance. Investigators began their methodical examination. They collected samples, took photographs, and noted every detail. The apartment, in its carefully curated perfection, had betrayed clues. Evidence was subtle but telling. A trail of blood in places it shouldn't have been, unusual odors emanating from containers, and signs that something had been handled and hidden with extreme care. The timeline of the evening began to unravel. Officers interviewed neighbors and guests, piecing together accounts of the night. They discovered that James had been unusually attentive, almost obsessive, in the way he orchestrated the dinner. Every dish, every conversation, every smile had been calculated not to impress his guests, but to conceal his intentions. As the investigation progressed, the pattern of deception became clearer. James Turner had orchestrated something unthinkable, a crime of such cruelty and calculated precision that it seemed impossible in a world where neighbors and friends were accustomed to ordinary routines. Questions mounted. Where was Mark Benson? What had happened in that apartment while guests laughed and enjoyed their meals? And most chilling of all, how could someone so trusted, so socially adept, commit an act so horrifying without anyone noticing? The investigation revealed that James had spent months planning, observing, and preparing. He had carefully studied Mark's habits, noting his routines, his schedules, his preferences. He had orchestrated the dinner party to serve a dual purpose: entertain friends while hiding the evidence of his intentions. The police found James's demeanor unsettling calm, articulate, almost proud in his ability to manipulate appearances. His explanations were rehearsed, his gestures precise, yet beneath the surface was a disturbing lack of empathy. He had crossed a line, one that would eventually expose the darkest capacities of human behavior. As authorities dug deeper, forensic evidence began to accumulate. Subtle stains, fingerprints in unusual places, and trace DNA all began to point to a night that was far from ordinary. The apartment, once a stage for social warmth, had become a crime scene of unimaginable horror. What happened to Mark Benson? How did an ordinary dinner party become a night of terror? Was the meal served to guests truly what it appeared to be, or had it concealed a grotesque truth? These questions remain unanswered. In the next installment, investigators revealed the shocking discoveries in the kitchen, the forensic evidence that exposed the unimaginable, and the courtroom drama that would follow. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and witness the full story of deception, horror, and betrayal that transformed a seemingly ordinary dinner party into one of the most chilling crimes imaginable. The truth is more horrifying than fiction, and the evidence will leave you stunned. The quiet of the apartment had long since faded into the sterile hum of investigative activity. Crime scene tape cordoned off the once cheerful living space, transforming it into a room of eerie stillness, where each object and surface was scrutinized for hidden truths. The seemingly ordinary dinner party that friends had praised for its warmth was now revealed to be a meticulous cover for a crime that shocked even seasoned detectives. Inside the apartment, forensic teams worked methodically. Every countertop, every utensil, every container in the kitchen was examined. What investigators found was more horrifying than anyone could have anticipated. Hidden in storage containers were remnants of human tissue, small fragments that initially appeared to be part of a mislaid ingredient, but DNA testing would later confirm was Mark Benson. Detectives retraced the events of the night. Witness statements, when pieced together with digital evidence, painted a chilling picture. James Turner had invited friends over, not merely to host a dinner, but to stage a crime scene that blended horror and normalcy. Every smile, every gesture, every perfectly roasted dish served to guests was calculated to conceal a grotesque truth. His roommate, Mark Benson, had been killed, dismembered, and portions of his body had been served in a dish, a grotesque culinary deception that blurred the line between social performance and murder. James's method was disturbingly meticulous. Security footage from the apartment complex revealed that Mark had returned home late in the afternoon, likely unaware that his ordinary day was about to end in unspeakable violence. A neighbor later recalled hearing muted sounds of struggle, brief but unmistakable moments before the door to the apartment closed tightly, cutting off the world outside. Inside, the confrontation escalated quickly. Friends would later learn from police reports that James had confronted Mark over minor grievances, financial disputes, and simmering personal resentments. What began as a verbal altercation spiraled into violence. The evidence suggested that James had methodically overpowered Mark, restrained him, and carried out the act in a way that allowed him to continue preparations for the dinner party without interruption. The psychological profile that emerged from interviews with acquaintances painted James as manipulative, socially skilled, and chillingly detached from empathy. Friends remembered his charm, his sociability, but no one had ever imagined the depths of his planning or the extent of his capacity for cruelty. Psychologists later suggested that his actions exhibited characteristics of psychopathy, superficial charm masking deep-seated malice, a lack of remorse, and an ability to maintain composure while committing horrific acts. Meanwhile, police pieced together the timeline. DNA analysis confirmed Mark's identity. Forensic accounting revealed a pattern of financial disputes between the roommates. Emails and text messages hinted at tension, with James expressing frustration over minor financial disagreements and perceived slights. Investigators speculated that these disputes may have been the trigger, the spark that ignited a premeditated plan that had been months in the making. Perhaps most shocking was the revelation that guests had unknowingly consumed part of Mark's body. The investigation determined that James had prepared a meatloaf dish from which portions were served during dessert. While the exact extent remains unclear, the horror of the scenario sent shockwaves through the community. The concept of hosting a social event while hiding such a monstrous act was almost unimaginable, a violation of both ethical and social norms so extreme that even seasoned detectives struggled to comprehend it. James Turner's arrest came quietly. Investigators approached him at his apartment once the forensic evidence had been thoroughly documented. He did not resist. In fact, officers described his demeanor as eerily calm. He was handcuffed, read his rights, and escorted out without incident. Questions arose immediately. How could someone so seemingly ordinary commit such an act without detection? How could friends, neighbors, and colleagues be completely unaware of the darkness lurking behind a familiar face? The trial that followed was intense and highly publicized. Prosecutors presented a meticulously detailed case. Forensic evidence linking James to the crime, witness testimony regarding his unusual behavior, and digital records establishing premeditation. The defense argued for insanity, attempting to explain the crime through psychological instability. However, the evidence was overwhelming. Each forensic finding, each witness account, each email and text message meticulously documented James's planning and intent. During the courtroom proceedings, the chilling nature of the case became widely known. Graphic descriptions of the crime, while sanitized for public reporting, conveyed the horror and methodical nature of James's actions. The prosecution emphasized the premeditated nature of the murder, the deliberate effort to disguise the act under the guise of a dinner party, and the calculated manipulation of social appearances to avoid suspicion. Psychologists and criminal profilers testified, highlighting the cold and calculated aspects of James's behavior. They described a man capable of maintaining social charm and outward normalcy while orchestrating acts of extreme violence. The jury was presented with a comprehensive picture of the planning, execution, and concealment of the crime, leaving little room for doubt regarding James's guilt. friends, and family of Mark Benson were left to grapple with the unimaginable. Statements in court described the shock, grief, and horror experienced by those who had known him intimately. For the family, the betrayal was compounded by the realization that the person they had trusted as a friend and housemate was capable of such calculated cruelty. Finally, after weeks of testimony and deliberation, the verdict was delivered. James Turner was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The courtroom fell silent as the sentence was read, a mixture of relief, disbelief, and sorrow settling over those present. Justice, in the form of legal consequence, had been served, but the emotional and psychological scars would linger far longer. Beyond the courtroom, the case sparked national and international attention. Discussions about the psychological profiles of offenders, the warning signs of premeditated violence, and the dangers of hidden malice dominated news cycles. True crime enthusiasts, legal experts, and psychologists dissected the case, attempting to understand the how and the why behind such an unfathomable act. Experts emphasized that while James Turner's case was extraordinarily extreme, it served as a reminder that outward appearances can be deceptive. The charm, wit, and social grace that initially defined him had masked a darker reality. It was a sobering example of how carefully curated personas can hide deep-seated malevolence. Community impact was profound. Neighbors and friends expressed heightened awareness of personal safety, boundaries, and the unpredictability of human behavior. Counseling services were made available to those affected directly and indirectly. The dinner party, once a symbol of social connection and warmth, became a cautionary tale, a story retold to highlight the importance of vigilance, awareness, and the fragile line between ordinary life and unimaginable horror. The case also prompted legal and academic discourse. Law enforcement agencies analyzed the investigation, identifying both successes and areas for improvement in handling subtle evidence, community notifications, and forensic documentation. Universities and criminology programs included the case in courses exploring criminal behavior, psychological profiling, and investigative techniques. As the public absorbed the full extent of James Turner's crime, questions lingered. How could such meticulous planning remain undetected for so long? What motivated someone to cross the boundary between ordinary social interaction and unspeakable violence? How do communities identify the warning signs before tragedy occurs? Ultimately, the story of James Turner and Mark Benson is a grim testament to the darker capacities of human behavior. It serves as a chilling reminder that even the most ordinary social settings can conceal unimaginable horrors. It reinforces the need for vigilance, awareness, and critical evaluation of the behaviors of those around us. In the aftermath, justice may have been served, but the emotional and psychological impact remains profound. Families were shattered, trust was eroded, and a once ordinary community now grapples with a story that will be remembered for its shocking and disturbing nature for years to come. The case stands as a cautionary tale, a narrative that blurs the line between the social masks people wear and the reality hidden beneath. It is a story of manipulation, betrayal, and the depths of human cruelty, reminding us that appearances can be dangerously deceiving. For those following the case, it is a stark lesson. The signs may be subtle, the truths hidden beneath layers of charm and social ease. Vigilance, awareness, and careful attention to the actions and words of those around us may sometimes be the only safeguards against the unthinkable. As the world continues to grapple with the realities of James Turner's crime, the memory of Mark Benson serves as a haunting reminder. Behind the smiles, the perfect meals, and the laughter of social gatherings, darkness can sometimes hide, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge. This story is a chilling example of how human behavior can defy comprehension. It reminds us to be mindful, to question the ordinary, and to understand that the line between normalcy and horror is sometimes thinner than we could ever imagine. Do you think enough justice was served for the crime of James Turner's? Drop your views in the comment section. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification icon for more chilling true crime stories.